And tell them what? Earl challenged. That there's a guy standing in our parking lot? They'll think we're crazy. Then what do we do? The three of them stood in silence, watching the motionless figure. The rain continued to fall. The streetlight flickered occasionally, and the man remained exactly where he'd been for over 2 hours now. At 3:30 a.m., a car pulled into the parking lot. It was an old sedan, rust visible even in the dim light. The driver got out, a middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail. She walked quickly toward the diner, giving the man under the streetlight a wide berth. The bell chimed as she entered, bringing with her the smell of rain and anxiety. "Thank God you're open," she said, approaching the counter. "I've been driving for hours. My car's making this horrible noise, and I think I'm lost." "Coffee," Sarah offered, grateful for the distraction. "Please, black and strong." As Sarah poured the coffee, the woman glanced toward the window. "Who's the guy outside? He was there when I pulled in." "We were wondering the same thing," Earl said. "Been standing there for hours." The woman's face grew pale. "Hours? That's not possible." "Why not?" Marcus asked. "Because I saw him about 60 miles back, outside a gas station. Same position, same coat. I thought it was strange then, but..." She trailed off, staring at the figure. The diner fell silent, except for the sound of rain and the occasional flicker of the fluorescent lights. Sarah felt a cold dread settling in her stomach. "That can't be the same person," Earl said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm telling you, it's him. Same height, same build, same way of standing. Like a statue." The woman's hands shook as she lifted the coffee cup to her lips. Marcus was already moving toward the window. "What gas station? What time?" "About an hour ago. Maybe an hour and 15 minutes. The Shell station just off exit 23. Sarah did quick math in her head. Even driving fast, it would take at least 45 minutes to cover that distance. If the woman had seen the same man an hour ago, 60 miles away, and he'd been standing in their parking lot for over 2 hours, "That's impossible," she whispered. "Unless there are two of them," Earl suggested, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it himself. The woman set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. "No, it's the same man, I'd swear on my life. There's something about his face, even from a distance you can tell. It's too pale, too smooth, like it's not really a face at all." As if summoned by her words, the lights in the diner flickered and went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, casting everything in a dull red glow. Through the window, the streetlight continued to burn, illuminating the motionless figure. "Generator must have kicked in," Earl muttered, but his voice sounded uncertain. Sarah moved closer to the window, drawn by a compulsion she couldn't explain. In the red emergency light, the scene outside looked surreal, almost otherworldly. The man under the streetlight seemed different somehow, more solid, more present. "He's closer," she said suddenly. "What?" Marcus joined her at the window. "He's closer to the building. I swear he was further away before." "That's impossible. We've been watching him." But as they all crowded around the window, it became clear that Sarah was right. The figure was now only about 30 feet from the diner's entrance, still perfectly motionless, but definitely closer than before. "When did he move?" the woman asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He didn't move," Earl insisted. "We would have seen him move." "Then how do you explain it?" No one had an answer. The emergency lighting cast strange shadows, making it difficult to see clearly, but there was no denying that the man's position had changed. "I want to leave," the woman said suddenly. "I want to get in my car and drive away from here." "Your car's making that noise, remember?" Earl pointed out. "You might not make it very far." "I don't care. I'd rather break down somewhere else than stay here with whatever that thing is." Thing. The word hung in the air, acknowledging what they were all beginning to think but were afraid to say. Sarah found herself studying the figure more intently. Something about Marcus's description of touching the man bothered her. The coldness, the unnatural texture of the skin, and now, the impossible movement without anyone seeing him actually move. "What if he's not human?" she said quietly. The others turned to stare at her. "I mean, what if he's something else? Something that just looks human from a distance?" "You're talking crazy," Earl said, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. "Am I? Think about it. He doesn't react to the rain or cold. He doesn't move like a normal person. The woman saw him 60 miles away an hour ago. He's somehow gotten closer without any of us seeing him move. What human can do all that?" Marcus was nodding slowly. "When I touched him, there was something else. Something I didn't mention because it sounded too crazy." "What?" "He didn't smell like a person. There was no scent at all. No cologne, no sweat, no body odor, nothing. Like he was made of. Nothing." The woman began gathering her purse and keys. "I'm leaving. Car noise or no car noise, I'm not staying here." She headed for the door, but as her hand touched the handle, all four of them saw something that made their blood run cold. The man under the streetlight had turned his his head to look directly at them, not his body, just his head, rotating with an unnatural smoothness until his face was pointing toward the diner. Even from this distance, they could see that Marcus had been right. The face was too pale, too smooth, like plastic or porcelain. But the worst part was the eyes. There were no eyes, just dark hollows where eyes should have been. The woman yanked her hand back from the door handle as if it had burned her. "Oh God, oh God, oh God," she whispered. "Everyone stay calm," Earl said, but his own voice was shaking. "There's got to be an explanation for this." As they watched in horror, the figure began to move. Not walking exactly, but gliding across the wet asphalt with a fluid motion that suggested he wasn't actually touching the ground. He approached the diner slowly, deliberately, his eyeless face never turning away from the window. "The back door," Sarah whispered. "We can go out the back door." "Where?" "My truck's out front," Marcus said. "My car too," the woman added. "The service road," Earl said suddenly, "behind the kitchen. There's a service road that leads to the highway. We can walk it." The man was now only 10 feet from the entrance. This close, they could see more details that defied rational explanation. His coat showed no signs of rain damage despite the downpour. His skin had an waxy, artificial sheen, and his movement was absolutely silent. No footsteps, no sound of fabric rustling, nothing. "Move," Sarah hissed. They hurried toward the back of the diner, through the kitchen and toward the rear exit. Earl grabbed a flashlight from behind the register, and Marcus picked up a large knife from the prep counter. The woman was crying silently, tears streaming down her cheeks. As they reached the back door, they heard the front door chime. The sound was exactly the same as when any normal customer entered, but somehow it seemed wrong, discordant. Sarah realized with horror that they'd never locked the front door. The diner was always open to anyone who might need help. "He's inside," Marcus whispered. They could hear footsteps now, slow, measured, deliberate. But the sound was wrong, too hollow, like someone walking in an empty space much larger than the diner. Earl unlocked the back door as quietly as possible. The service road was barely visible in the darkness, but it was their only option. One by one, they slipped outside into the rain. The service road was muddy and overgrown, clearly not used regularly. They moved as quickly as they dared in the darkness, Earl's flashlight providing minimal illumination. Behind them, the diner grew smaller, but they could still see the glow of the emergency lighting through the windows. "There," the woman gasped, pointing ahead. "I can see the highway." They were perhaps 100 yards from safety when Sarah made the mistake of looking back. The man was standing in the back doorway of the diner, his pale face turned in their direction. Even at this distance, the absence of eyes was clearly visible, just dark holes in an otherwise blank face. "Don't look back," she told the others. "Whatever you do, don't look back." But Marcus had already turned. "Jesus Christ," he breathed. "How did he know which way we went?" The figure began to move toward them with that same unnatural gliding motion. Despite his apparent lack of hurry, he was covering ground impossibly fast. "Run," Earl said. They ran. The muddy service road was treacherous in the rain, and more than once one of them slipped and fell. But they kept moving, driven by a primal terror that overrode rational thought. The highway grew closer, the sound of distant traffic barely audible over the storm. Sarah risked another glance over her shoulder. The man was gaining on them, moving with that horrible silent grace. His face remained fixed in their direction, and she realized with growing horror that he never seemed to blink or show any expression whatsoever. They reached the highway as a semi-truck was approaching. Earl waved the flashlight frantically, and the truck began to slow. The four of them scrambled up the embankment, slipping in the wet grass. The truck driver, a burly man with a gray beard, rolled down his window. "What the hell are you people doing out here? Please," the woman gasped. "We need help. There's something chasing us." The driver looked past them toward the service road. "I don't see anything." Sarah turned to look. The man was gone. "He was there," Marcus insisted, "right behind us." "Who was behind you?" They spent several minutes trying to explain, but it was clear the truck driver thought they were either drunk or crazy. Eventually, he agreed to give them a ride to the next town where they could call for help. As the truck pulled away from the highway shoulder, Sarah pressed her face to the window and looked back at Murphy's diner. The building was dark now, the emergency lighting apparently having failed. But there, under the streetlight in the parking lot, stood the familiar figure. He was waving, not the normal wave of a person saying goodbye, but a slow, mechanical motion, like a mannequin being manipulated by invisible strings. His eyeless face remained turned toward the departing truck, and that horrible wave continued until they were out of sight. The truck driver let them off at a 24-hour convenience store in the next town. They called the police, but when officers arrived at Murphy's diner an hour later, they found nothing unusual. No sign of the mysterious man, no evidence of a disturbance. The diner was empty but undamaged. Earl never returned to work there. Marcus changed his route to avoid Highway 47 entirely. The woman whose car had been making noise found that it ran perfectly fine once she was away from the diner. And Sarah, she moved back to the city and took a day job, swearing she'd never work nights again. But sometimes, walking home from late dinners or evening events, she'd pass under streetlights and feel an overwhelming compulsion to look over her shoulder. She never saw him again, but she never stopped looking. The official report listed the incident as a case of mass hysteria brought on by stress and isolation. Murphy's Diner remained closed for 3 months before new owners took over. They reported no unusual incidents, though they did mention that the streetlight in the parking lot seemed to flicker more than it should. But truck drivers who still take Highway 47 late at night sometimes report seeing a figure standing under that light. Always the same description: average height, dark coat, absolutely motionless. They say he waves sometimes, that slow mechanical gesture that makes their skin crawl. Most of them drive on without stopping. The smart ones do anyway. The rain had been falling for 3 hours straight when Sarah Chen first noticed him. She was working the night shift at Murphy's Diner, the only place open after midnight on this forgotten stretch of Highway 47, and the monotonous drumming against the windows had become white noise. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered occasionally, casting intermittent shadows across the checkered linoleum floor. Outside, the single street light in the parking lot illuminated a small circle of wet asphalt, and that's where he stood. At first glance, he seemed ordinary enough. Average height, wearing what looked like a dark coat, perfectly still beneath the amber glow. Sarah had seen plenty of odd characters during her 2 years working nights at the diner. Truckers taking breaks, insomniacs seeking coffee, travelers whose cars had broken down. But something about this man made her pause while refilling the coffee pot. He wasn't moving, not at all. "Hey Earl," she called to the cook, who was scraping grease from the grill in the kitchen. "You see that guy out there?" Earl, a heavy-set man in his 50s with arms covered in faded tattoos, glanced through the service window. His weathered face squinted against the glass. "What guy?" "Under the streetlight. He's been standing there for like 10 minutes. Earl dried his hands on his apron and walked over to the main window. The rain continued its relentless assault, creating rivulets that distorted their view. "I see him. Probably waiting for a ride or something. Maybe his car broke down." Sarah nodded, but something felt wrong. The man's posture was too rigid, too unnatural. "Should we check on him? It's freezing out there. Leave him be. If he wants help, he'll come in." Earl returned to his cleaning, the sound of steel wool against metal filling the silence. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She continued her work, wiping down tables and refilling condiment bottles, stealing glances at the window every few minutes. The man never moved. He stood facing the diner, arms at his sides, completely motionless despite the increasingly heavy downpour. At 2:17 a.m., the bell above the door chimed as Marcus Rodriguez pushed inside, shaking water from his jacket. Marcus was a regular, a long-haul trucker who stopped by every few weeks on his route between Chicago and Denver. His weathered face looked more tired than usual, deep lines etched around his brown eyes. "Coffee, black, and whatever pie you've got left," he said, settling onto a stool at the counter. "Apple or cherry, and make it a big slice. Been driving since noon yesterday." As Sarah served his order, she found herself glancing toward the window again. The man was still there, unchanged. "Marcus, you notice anything weird about that guy outside?" The trucker turned to look, chewing thoughtfully on his pie. "Under the streetlight? Yeah, I saw him when I pulled in. Figured he was waiting for someone. He's been there for over an hour." Marcus set down his fork. "An hour? In this rain?" He studied the figure more carefully. "That's strange. You sure he hasn't moved at all?" "Not once. I've been watching." Earl emerged from the kitchen, coffee mug in hand. "You two still going on about that guy? Maybe he's drunk. Or high. Hell, maybe he's dead on his feet. Wouldn't be the first time we've had weird shit happen here." "Dead on his feet?" Sarah's voice carried a note of concern. "Figure of speech, kid. Point is, people do strange things. Not our problem unless he comes in here causing trouble." But Marcus was still staring through the rain-streaked glass. "I don't like it. Something's off about the way he's standing. Too straight, you know, like he's not really there." The words sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She walked closer to the window, pressing her face against the cool glass. The man was perhaps 50 feet away, clearly visible under the amber light. His dark coat appeared to be soaked through, but he showed no signs of discomfort. No shifting weight, no hunched shoulders against the cold, no movement whatsoever. "Maybe I should go check on him," she said. "No." Earl's voice was firm. "It's past 2 in the morning, and you're a young woman alone. If someone wants to stand in the rain like an idiot, that's their business." Marcus drained his coffee cup. "Earl's right, but I'll take a look when I head out, see if he needs help or directions or something." 20 minutes later, as Marcus prepared to leave, all 3 of them gathered at the window. The man remained in the exact same position, now clearly drenched but showing no reaction to the weather. "This is seriously creeping me out," Sarah whispered. Marcus zipped up his jacket and headed for the door. "I'll go talk to him. If he's in some kind of trouble, we can call someone." The bell chimed as Marcus stepped into the night. Through the window, Sarah and Earl watched him walk across the parking lot toward the streetlight. The rain seemed to intensify, creating a curtain of water that made it difficult to see clearly. Marcus approached the figure slowly, his hands visible and non-threatening. They could see him speaking, though his words were lost to the storm. The man under the streetlight didn't respond. Marcus moved closer, reaching out as if to tap the figure on the shoulder. Then something happened that made Sarah's blood freeze. Marcus jerked backward as if he'd been shocked. He stood there for a moment, staring at the motionless figure, then turned and ran back toward the diner. His face was pale when he burst through the door, water streaming from his clothes. "What happened?" Earl demanded. Marcus was breathing hard, his eyes wide with something between confusion and fear. There's something wrong with him." "What do you mean wrong?" Sarah asked. "I mean, he's not. I don't think he's alive." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Earl scoffed. "What's that supposed to mean? Of course he's alive. He's standing there, isn't he?" "No, you don't understand." Marcus ran his hands through his wet hair. "I got close enough to touch him, and he's cold, stone cold. And his skin, it's not right. It's like..." He struggled for words. "Like wax or plastic." Sarah felt her heart racing. "Did he say anything? React at all?" "Nothing. I spoke to him, asked if he was okay, if he needed help. No response. Then I reached out to tap his shoulder, and that's when I felt it. The cold. And his coat. It's not wet." "What?" Earl stepped closer to the window. "His coat isn't wet. I know how that sounds, but I'm telling you, the rain isn't touching him. It's like he's got some kind of invisible barrier around him." Earl stared at Marcus like he'd lost his mind. "You're talking nonsense. People don't have invisible barriers. Maybe you just couldn't tell in the dark. I know what I saw, what I felt." Marcus's voice carried conviction despite his obvious fear. Sarah looked out at the figure again. From this distance, it was impossible to tell if Marcus was right about the rain, but something about the man's absolute stillness was becoming more unsettling by the minute. "We should call the police," she said.